All right, here we go. Dumalong Botswana. Hey. Dumalong Botswana. Hey, welcome in to Indaba, Africa. Chris White here coming to you live from central Pennsylvania. Clear on the other side of the world where we too are concerned about events in Botswana. We are now just 13 minutes away from a declared state of emergency in the southern African country of Botswana and a 28-day extreme social distancing, or for lack of a better term, a lockdown that is about to take place in Botswana. So there we go. Just a matter of minutes away now. We've done this, had these little live streams when Zimbabwe went into lockdown, when South Africa went into lockdown, and now that Botswana is following suit here with a 28-day extreme social distancing lockdown in Southern Africa. So let's bring folks up to speed. What's happening as we approach the top of the hour for Botswana's lockdown? The president of Botswana went on BTV, Botswana television, and announced that he is declaring a state of emergency that would take place on the 2nd of April, which is now just 12 minutes away. And that concurrent with the state of emergency, which is indefinite, he would declare a 28-day nationwide extreme social distancing or lockdown. Begins on April 2nd for 28 days. Along with this, the president announced a raft of other measures that are designed to help Botswana survive this situation in Southern Africa and deal with the COVID-19, the Wuhan coronavirus situation. Looks like a little bit of light shining in there in my face. It's early evening here in central Pennsylvania. So President Masisi announced the following financial measures meant to help ease some of the challenges taking place as a consequence of dealing with the coronavirus. So what he did mention was that there would be a loan repayment holiday that would last between 3 and 6 months, in which banks would not call home or vehicle loans in, give people a grace period, an opportunity to avoid making those payments for 3 to 6 months. Very smart move, good effort by the government to work with the banking industry to ensure that loans aren't called in. We don't want to see that sort of thing happening anywhere. People find themselves through no fault of their own, through no business failures, but rather as a consequence of government action, shutting down businesses and forcing people to be at a distance apart, puts businesses in a precarious position as well as their employees. So this is very forward-thinking, very forward-leaning action, I believe, on the part of the BDP, the Botswana Democratic Party, which rules in Botswana. And so a 3 to 6 month loan repayment holiday, very smart. Now, he also mentioned a 2 billion Pula relief fund, the 2 billion Pula COVID-19 relief fund. At current rates, that's about 168 million US dollars. And that money is meant to be for wage subsidies for workers who are affected by the crisis, also to guarantee loans by commercial banks, and finally, it would be to give credit to businesses themselves who are affected by what is happening. So those are the things that fall under that 2 billion Pula relief fund that's set up here from the very beginning. Now, the president also announced that the intent was for the government to build up its reserves, national reserves of some key commodity items. Among those are grain, water, always important in a place like Botswana, medical supplies, and fuel, and that the fuel prices would be reduced. For those unfamiliar with the situation in Botswana, the government does control the price of fuel. So what you pay at the pump is set by the government, and when it goes up or down is a governmental decision. So with the price of petroleum currently in the tank, and the price of gasoline and fuel dropping at the pump around the globe, the government of Botswana has decided to lower the price for those who have to go out and get fuel. So that's some good news. So there you have it. We are now 9 minutes away from Botswana becoming the final country in the area to go on a nationwide lockdown. South Africa is already on a nationwide lockdown. They have 16 more days to go on their 21-day lockdown. So on the 16th of April, it's supposed to end in South Africa. But at this point, we don't have any strong indication that that's actually going to be the case. In fact, one could very well suspect that the lockdown in South Africa is likely to be extended, given that it appears that the virus is now turning up in townships around the country, particularly in the Western Cape, in the Cape Flats. Given the informal settlements, the tightness, the density of people living in a place like that, it's very likely that if the virus gets a hold there, it will spread rapidly and affect a large number of people. It's a possibility. So with that in mind, it is very likely that I'm going to have to move this screen because it looks very distracting there. It doesn't look like the light goes away. It seems to want to like me there. All right, so with the virus making an appearance in townships, it's not a good sign for South Africa. So the 16 April date may in fact not be the date that this ends. So there you go. So let's do a global summary of where we're at right now. Kind of morose talking about this, but bear in mind that 3 to 5 million people die every year from malaria. The majority of them die in Africa. And the numbers we're talking about, while they're concerning, are not at those levels at this stage. So as we went to broadcast here a few minutes ago, I looked up the current figures from the Johns Hopkins site and another site, which both tend to be reliable sources. At this hour, nearly 1 million people have been confirmed to have the COVID-19 virus, either currently with it, recovered from it, or sadly have passed away. 926,095 confirmed cases of COVID-19, the Wuhan coronavirus, around the planet. 46,413 fatalities. The United States has a distinction of being the country with the most confirmed cases. That no doubt has something to do with the fact that massive international travel in and out of the United States, and also the fact that we're now testing record numbers of people on a daily basis around the country. The United States has 209,071 cases, nearly a quarter of the total. But we have just 1/10 of the fatalities, fortunately, 4,633. That's just 1/10 of the global fatalities from COVID-19 at this point, despite having nearly 20% of the confirmed cases. In Pennsylvania, right here where I'm at, we have 5,805 confirmed cases of COVID-19 with 74 fatalities at this stage. York County, the county I live in, with a population of about 450,000 people, we have 79 cases. That's up from 57 yesterday. And unfortunately, so far, we have 0 fatalities. Switching to Southern Africa, as we approach the top of the hour here, about 6 minutes away. In Southern Africa, South Africa currently has 1,380 cases. That's not much change from the previous day. I'm not sure if the data hasn't been reported or what's going on. Welcome to folks coming in. We're now just 6 minutes away from the top of the hour, and the Republic of Botswana going into an indefinite state of emergency and a 28-day lockdown. That's just a matter of minutes away for Botswana. As I was saying, South Africa, 1,380 cases, and now has 5 fatalities, confirmed fatalities from COVID-19. And Botswana is up to 4 cases now and has 1 fatality. As I understand it, this supposedly was a woman who passed away in Ramotswa back about a week ago, before there were any confirmed cases in Botswana, and presumably autopsy determined that she had been infected with the virus, which is making people question whether the government's hiding cases or not. I suspect that wasn't the case. They're not hiding cases, but what happens is that if someone passes away and they hadn't previously shown symptoms or hadn't sought medical care, then there's an autopsy and you find the case, then retrospectively you report the case. So the question here from Croy Thompson. Croy is asking, did I hear about how COVID-19 got to Zimbabwe? Well, ZANU-PF and the Ministry of Health have not released how it got there, but we do know that the 1 fatality in Zimbabwe, who was the journalist Zororo, who was very famous on television there in Zimbabwe, unfortunately 30 years old, came back from New York. He had traveled to New York and then came back and was diagnosed with it rather quickly. Within 3 days of his arrival in Zimbabwe, he passed away tragically. This is a man who comes from a connected, wealthy family with lots of resources, well known, ostensibly in the prime of his life, although we have no idea if he had any underlying conditions, health conditions that would have contributed to this, but just 30 years old. And in 3 days, he died. His brother had talked to him on the phone, and he told the media that when he spoke to his brother, Zororo, in the hospital, Zororo was scared and lonely because he'd been isolated in the hospital, and sadly, he died shortly after that. So no, the authorities in Zimbabwe have not indicated, or probably don't even know at this stage, how it got in the country. But honestly, folks, the way it's getting to Africa is is people are traveling back to the continent, whether they're Africans or Europeans or Americans or Chinese who are coming into Africa or returning home either from business trips or from school or tourism, whatever the case is. And that's how it's gotten on the continent. Same way that got to America. It's the way it's gotten around the world. Lots of Chinese left Wuhan while the Chinese government was covering up what was happening and not telling the world. If you look at what's happening into the middle of February, the World Health Organization and the Chinese government were both saying that this was under control and it was not something worried about, misleading us about how it was transmitted. Now, part of that we can chalk up probably to ignorance. They didn't have all the facts or the information. But the opaque behavior of the Chinese Communist Party has certainly not helped the world out. But there's no doubt that it's traveled through the air. Now, back in January, when airlines started spending, we have 3 minutes. I just want to check 3 minutes, and Botswana goes into a indefinite state of emergency and a 28-day lockdown. But once again, back in January, when the airlines in East Africa, Kenya Airways, started suspending flights and others suspending flights to China, to and from China, Ethiopian Airlines was still flying in and out of China. They did that well into February. I don't know the exact date they stopped, but I believe it was just recently here in March. But Ethiopian Airlines, when they did that on LinkedIn, I criticized them. And I was attacked, of course, well, you just don't like Africa. And if you say that about me, you don't know me. So that's clearly someone that didn't know me. But I was attacked and accused of being, not xenophobic because I'm not Ethiopian, but attacking Ethiopian Airlines. I wasn't attacking them. I was just saying that their decision to continue flying flights to and from China in the midst of this crisis in which it was clear that something serious was happening was not prudent. But Ethiopian Airlines makes a lot of money. It has a lot of close ties to China. A lot of Ethiopians and Chinese travel back and forth. My concern wasn't so much Ethiopia and China, although I care about Ethiopians. My concern is that I realize that Ethiopia, in many respects, Ethiopian Airlines is Africa's airline. Ethiopian Airlines is pervasive around the continent and continues to increase the number of routes it has. And what happens is that people fly from China, land at the airport in Addis, the Bole airport. You're in the airport, you see people get ill, pass around the virus, close quarters. People get on a flight and they fly from Addis to Gaborone or to Johannesburg or to Lagos or wherever they're going around the continent because Ethiopian Airlines has links across the continent and then people take it with them. So I criticized Ethiopian that I thought it was an unwise public health decision and stingy of them to continue flying back in January to China and to Wuhan. They had flights in January to and from Wuhan, China. Ethiopian Airlines. Now, I'm not trying to beat up on Ethiopian Airlines. It's a quality airline, and thank goodness it's done some amazing things across Africa. And unusually for me, as someone that doesn't believe in state-owned enterprises, Ethiopian Airlines is a state-owned enterprise, and it is now 1 minute before the hour. We have 30 seconds, and the Republic of Botswana, I'll get back to Ethiopian after the top of the hour. But Ethiopian Airlines flies in and out. But Republic of Botswana will now be going on lockdown here in less than 30 seconds. A little background Setswana music in the background there as we switch over. We are now the seconds away from the top of the hour. It is now midnight. It is seconds after the hour of midnight in Southern Africa. The Republic of Botswana is now in a declared state of emergency, which President Masisi has made indefinite. And it has now begun a 28-day lockdown of extreme social distancing in which people are not supposed to be out and about. So there you have it, folks. Country in Southern Africa, the last one to go down. We've already seen South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, Lesotho, and Zimbabwe all declare lockdowns. Botswana is the last country in the area to have gone to it, and we have just reached that stage moments ago. So back to Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines, again, I'm not a fan of state-owned enterprises, but Ethiopian Airlines is a well-run organization. The government made a decision many, many years ago that while it was owned by the state, it would be allowed to operate as an independent private entity. So the government does appoint the people who run the company, but they have, for the most part, appointed quality business people, and it has had a separate bottom line and allowed it to run its business that way. And as a consequence, Ethiopian has done amazingly well. Most of their aircraft are pretty nice. They do a pretty good job. Service is excellent, and they have wings all around the world. But again, I did criticize them in January for continuing flights in and out of Wuhan, and I was attacked for that. So anyway, whatever. Leadership comes with risk. You have to be honest with people and let them know when their shirt tail's hanging out. So Ethiopia recently canceled flights in a lot of areas across Africa, although they're still flying to the United States a couple of days ago. I wasn't aware of that until I saw that a flight out of Lusaka was going to Addis, and from Addis, the flight was coming to the U.S. for people in Botswana who wanted to repatriate. Kind of caught me by surprise. I did not realize that we still had flights. If you look at FlightAware or Flight Radar 24, those different systems that show you the aircraft, they're in the air around the world. If you look over Europe and the United States, you still see a lot of aircraft in the air. But if you look over Southern Africa, it's just crickets. There's almost no aircraft flying. Looked at South Africa yesterday, nothing. But FlightAware, or I think it's Flight 24 is another, but FlightAware is an excellent site to do that. So there you have it. Botswana is now in a lockdown. Let me run through the case again here very quickly for those who joined late. Globally at this hour, we have 926,095 confirmed cases of the Wuhan coronavirus, or COVID-19 by its scientific name. That includes, sadly, 46,413 fatalities attributed to the virus. In the U.S., we have the distinction of being the country with the most confirmed cases at this stage, with 209,071 confirmed cases of the virus, 4,633 fatalities. So at the moment, while the U.S. has nearly 20% of confirmed cases, fortunately, we have just 10% of global fatalities. Hopefully that will stay low. In Pennsylvania, the state I reside in, we have 5,805 confirmed cases, which is quite a considerable jump over the last week, with 74 fatalities. In this county, York County, with a population of about 450,000, we have 79 confirmed cases and 0 fatalities at this hour. And very quickly, before I move on, South Africa, once again, 1,380 confirmed cases, 5 fatalities. Botswana now has 4 confirmed cases, up from 1 yesterday, with 1 fatality, which, as I understand, was a lady from Ramotswa. So I mentioned previously that for this indefinite state of emergency and 28-day lockdown, President Masisi also announced a $2 billion Pula, or $168 million COVID-19 relief package, which includes loan repayment holiday, which will allow people who have car loans and home loans to not make their loan payments for this period, 3 to 6 months, which will not affect their credit history and not result in late payments or penalties. So this is a good move by the government working with the banking industry, as we're all caught in the mess here. The relief fund will subsidize wages for workers affected by the situation, guarantee loans by commercial banks, and also provide credit to businesses. And the government has said it's going to build up its reserves of grain, water, medical supplies, and fuel, and that they would lower fuel prices. For those unaware of it, once again, the government of Botswana, as in South Africa, sets the price for fuel, something that we did here in the United States back in the 1970s, but fortunately got away from that. And so consumers get gouged, or they get a nice break when prices drop. Currently, with oil prices in the tank, energy demand down around the globe, petrol prices have dropped precipitously. And so the government is finally going to lower those prices. So there you have it. Let's talk a little bit about Botswana. So what about Botswana? Botswana is just a map behind me. We can slide it over just a little bit there if you can see it. Okay. Not so well, but that's a map of Botswana, which is located in southern Africa. It's a country of approximately 2.2 million people. And it has a very interesting history. It is, in my view, when I taught at the War College, and I always ask my African students, I said, what countries in Africa were never colonized? And invariably, you'll hear Liberia, and then, of course, you'll hear Ethiopia. And Ethiopians are very proud that they were never. What connection do I have to Botswana? Michael Johnson says, what connection? Well, I have a long connection to Botswana, Michael. So interesting enough, of course, like most young people, watch The Gods Must Be Crazy, and it was kind of, it was filmed around the Kalahari, so I had an interest in the region because of that. But my first tie to it was back in the 1980s. I was a student at Ohio University as an undergraduate, and I graduated university in 1989. And surprisingly enough, our keynote speaker for the graduation in Athens, Ohio, was the sitting president of Botswana. The reason for that is that at the time, Ohio University had been planning to build a branch campus in Botswana for students, so Botswana could attend Ohio University in Botswana. That never came to fruition, as far as I know. You have things like Limpopo, which later happened, I guess, with Malaysia and Botswana, but Ohio University was going to do this back in the 80s, and as a consequence, the president of Botswana came to Ohio University and gave the commencement address at my graduation. So I had an interest in it already. I also had a deep in South Africa. As a consequence, became familiar with the Tswana people. And once you become familiar with Botswana-speaking people in South Africa, naturally you have an affinity for the Setswana, their cousins, their friends, their family who live in Botswana. And So that was the first link. Then later, I did a couple undergraduate papers, or excuse me, a couple graduate papers on Botswana, talking about its history. And it was the first country in Africa that I ever physically visited after I moved to Tunisia. It was my first trip, and I intentionally went there because I had a deep interest in it already. And so there you go. I later worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I was the analyst who covered Botswana. And so I covered political and military issues, talking about that, keeping our Department of Defense informed about events in Southern Africa and Botswana and with SADC. And that's another reason why I became interested. Then later, I actually lived in Botswana, Michael. I was the Security Cooperation Chief and the Senior Defense Representative for the U.S. government, for the U.S. military in Botswana. I lived there from 2008 till 2010. I worked at the American Embassy, and I lived in the government enclave. And as a consequence of my responsibilities and duties there, I traveled throughout the country, worked on rehabilitating our HIV program. I had a really fantastic employee that worked for me there named David Kelapile. I don't know if he's on here tonight, but David was top drawer, did a great job. We reinvigorated our HIV program with the Botswana Defense Force. We helped them redesign their intelligence enterprise so that it was focused on military intelligence and not spying on refugees and political figures, which is what the military had been doing prior to that. But with the creation of the National Intelligence Agency, under President Kama, there was a need to put the military back into military intelligence. So I traveled throughout the country. I've been all over. I've been to Jwaneng. I've been to Hanzi. I've been to Maun, Francistown, all over the country. So yeah, that's kind of my connection there. I have a lot of acquaintances and professional relations. I also, while I taught at the Army War College here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, I had two different officers, both of whom have become general officers now in the Botswana Defense Force. And I also was a personal relationship with one of the former commanders of the Botswana Defense Force, General Halabotswe, who I knew when he was just a one-star. And then he later became the commander of the Botswana Defense Force. And he and I traveled to North Carolina trying to help establish the state partnership program between North Carolina and Botswana, along with an officer from the North Carolina National Guard who worked for me at the embassy, Sid Shin, who's in the Carolina Guard still to this day. So that's been my relationship. I've kept ties to Botswana as best I can and kept up with it and followed it. I have been back to the country on several occasions since then for business related to the Department of Defense. And also, while I lived there, we did a number of what we call humanitarian assistance projects, one of which was very familiar, but two of them were very, very fulfilling. The first was something called Tebelepele. Tebelepele, for those from Botswana, you know what that is. That's a voluntary counseling and testing center. That was a program started by the U.S. Peace Corps and USAID about 20 years ago with volunteers and paid members from Botswana society. And what they did is they were early adopters to get people to make it okay to get tested for HIV and to encourage people to get tested to know your status to help stop the spread and transmission of HIV, which is interesting. We're talking about COVID-19 here, and how do you stop that? Well, social distancing. Well, we know how to stop HIV too, but back then it wasn't being stopped. And sadly, at that stage, in the late 1990s and early part of this century, Botswana had the distinction of having the highest adult prevalency rate on the planet at 38.5% of those aged 15 to 49 being HIV positive back then. So Tebelepele was an interesting project. It was headed initially by a South African who was hired to do it. And later a director from Botswana came in. But before I left the country, it had tested nearly every adult in the country at least once. It's all anonymous. So Tebelepele was something I worked with, a very good non-government organization. I understand it fell on some difficult times as a result of loss of funding from the U.S. and some other things happening. But during my time there and prior to my time, it was quite an interesting organization. My interaction with them was that we used Defense Department dollars to build the voluntary counseling and testing centers. Of the 15 that were located around the country, which put them within 50 kilometers of virtually 95% of the population, those 15 centers, which we built 13 of them, U.S. Department of Defense, including the one at Francistown, which cost us $500,000 US. Was there for the ribbon cutting in 2008 with our ambassador, Steve Nolan, and quite a huge activity. It was interesting because back then, that facility in 2008 was built by a Botswana contractor, but they didn't have any people. They subcontracted the Chinese. Already in 2008, the construction being done, most of it in Botswana was being done by Chinese. Now, that was sort of an artificiality because at that time, most of the construction companies in Botswana were actually in South Africa, building venues and renovating things for the upcoming soccer World Cup, the football, the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. You folks remember that, those who speak Setswana, because what was the theme? Kenako, it's time. That's Setswana for it's time, Kenako. So that was what's happening back then. So I worked with building that voluntary counseling and testing center. Let's see. It's cool to hear. Got a lot of questions for you when you have some free time. If you don't mind, I don't mind, Michael. You're welcome to ask a few of them here. I'm going to stay on for a bit longer, probably until the bottom of the hour if people hang on. I'm here to answer questions. I don't want to talk about Botswana. It's a wonderful country. People should know about it. And if you are a Botswana, you probably don't mind hearing good things about your country. So feel free to ask questions. But continuing on, so that was one of the NGOs we worked with. Another one we work with, which is a fantastic NGO, and I want to put a little nod out to this, folks. During this COVID-19 Wuhan coronavirus, let's not forget charitable giving. Let's not forget that people have lost their jobs, but some people have resources, whether they're working or not, either wealthy or they have something to fall back on, or they have guaranteed incomes, that sort of thing. Let's not forget the less fortunate. And let me make a plug here. This is not a paid plug because I don't get paid for this, but here you go. This is a NGO that you all should know about, Stepping Stones International, right there. Fantastic organization started by Lisa Jamu, who's an American. She and her husband, they married, I think he's from Malawi originally. And they moved to Botswana, and she started this activity. It's an after-school program for at-risk kids. Originally, it was just for kids who were either HIV positive or orphans of parents who passed away as a consequence of HIV. As you can imagine, in Botswana, there was a great need for this sort of thing. So they provide after-school activities. So kids have an opportunity to learn about farming, about raising crops, garden, learn about finances, how to balance a checkbook, life skills, counseling. They get to interact with each other, and the Stepping Stones get support from First National Bank, FNB, others who donate money and resources. And it's a fantastic program. Lisa and her crew do a really good job. So Stepping Stones International, I got involved with them in Muchudi. We helped build a center for them and expand a center for them. It was fantastic, and I still maintain a relationship with Stepping Stones to this day. I encourage you, if you have anything to donate to them or you can help them out, please feel free. Please do that. Let's not forget organizations that rely on charitable donations at this stage. What has been the key, Croy says, what has been the key difference between Botswana's development in contrast to other African countries? Also, while in Southern Africa, please do not wear... Okay, all right. So I'm waiting for somebody to call me out. So Croy says, also, while in Southern Africa, please do not wear a New Zealand team's rugby jersey. All right, fair enough. But let me ask if you can take a guess why I might be wearing a New Zealand rugby. Okay. Well, I have a few Botswana shirts, but I'm having trouble finding them. So I wanted to wear something. Of course, the national colors of Botswana are blue, white, and black. All right. So this jersey has blue on it. It has these kind of like stripes in it, like a zebra. And it has the advertisement from Investec, which is an investment company, and their symbol is a zebra. Well, a zebra is well known in Botswana. So yes, I apologize for wearing the New Zealand rugby jersey. It is a Blues jersey. I got called out on that, so I'm glad somebody caught that. If you watch my videos, you'll notice a theme. I tend to wear rugby jerseys as much as possible, or I wear an African shirt. I have a lot of African shirts from my adventures all over Africa. Just really quickly, I'll get back to answering Croy's questions in a moment. But for those who don't know a little bit about me, I'm a 36-year veteran, 36-and-a-half-year veteran of the U.S. Army. I was in the Signal Corps as an enlisted soldier back during the Cold War, went back to university, came back into the Army as an intelligence officer. I worked at tactical intelligence, operational intelligence, and eventually strategic intelligence. And also always had a deep interest in Southern Africa and wanted to be what we have in the Army known as a foreign area officer. So I became a foreign area officer in the mid-1990s and actually started doing the work later in the 1990s and spent most of the last 20 years of my career as a foreign area officer, much of that in Africa. And in Africa, I lived in Tunisia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, Uganda, Ethiopia. Those are the places I lived, not I visited. I've visited well over 30, close to 40 of the countries in Africa and worked in those places on short-term assignments. But I've lived in those 8 countries in Africa, and so I have quite a diverse experience there and done a number of different things, both as an attaché or defense advisor, as the Commonwealth countries call it. and also as a security assistance or security cooperation officer. So back to Croy's questions, what's been a key difference with Botswana's development? Well, this will go back to the story I started to tell earlier, and I interrupted myself at the top of the hour when I was talking specifically about the countries. When I ask my students or I ask people talking about Africa, I said, what countries in Africa have never been colonized? The two answers I always get are Liberia and Ethiopia. And I say, wrong, you're completely wrong. And it's controversial, but let me explain what I mean by it. First off, Liberia was colonized. Now, the fact that the people colonizing it had brown or black skin doesn't mean it wasn't colonized. Colonization is when an alien political power comes in, a foreign power, and introduces an alien system of governance upon an indigenous or local population. Now, what is Liberia but exactly that? Americo-Liberians, who never represented as a group more than 5% of the population, came to Liberia where there were already Africans living. They landed in Monrovia and they established a government and they modeled it on the United States because that was what they knew, that was their experience. And so Black Americans colonized Liberia. Now, that's not popular with a lot of folks, but that's just the reality. They imposed an alien political system on the indigenous population there, and it had an impact. And it was affected by their relations with local groups there. So that Liberia, in fact, was colonized. It just wasn't colonized. It was colonized by America, you could say. Not officially, not by the government, but by Americans. So it was colonized. Now, this one's more controversial, and I'll get back to Botswana in a second. I say that Ethiopia was colonized too, and Ethiopians who are fiercely patriotic take exception with that. But in 1936, the Italians under Mussolini invaded and they overthrew and chased the government of Emperor Haile Selassie out of Ethiopia. And for 5 years, they colonized Addis Ababa, not the entire country. Most of the country was controlled by rebels and insurgents who were trying to restore the rightful government, but the Italians did colonize. And that was more controversial. So back to Botswana and why its development is different. So my answer on this, which I tell people, is that my argument for why Botswana is a little bit different is one, it's homogenous. Now, not entirely. There are many subgroups within the ethnic groups there. So you have many different Tswana-speaking groups, but they're all closely related, and they represent 85% of the population. You have Kalanga, who come from Zimbabwe originally, and many of them live in Botswana, but they're a small group. You have Europeans or whites, for lack of a better term, who make up about 7 and 9% of the population. And then the rest of the population, you also have the San, the Bushmen, who live in Botswana, or as the Setswana call them Basarwa, but that's not the most polite or friendly term. So the San is the proper name for the Bushmen that are known by. And the Bushmen, there are about 50,000 in Botswana. So 85% of the people beyond that are all Setswana speakers or Tswana speakers. It's the same language, just in South Africa, it's Tswana. In Botswana, it's called Setswana. So what happens is that you have the three chiefs. There's a term in Tswana called Kosi. And Kosi is a chief and advisor, someone who leads a local group, and they're normally selected and they are chosen for that role. And what happens is that as the Boers, the Afrikaans-speaking South Africans, advanced up into Africa, they started passing through what is today Botswana, or what at the time was termed as Bechuanaland in the 19th century. And these chiefs, who most of their economy is based on cattle, because there's not much to grow around in that part of the world, they did not like the incursions and did not like competing with these folks. And at some point, the three chiefs who were responsible for founding the early history of the country, they approached the British and asked if the British, who were ruling, could protect them. And so the British, eager to stop the spread of the Afrikaners from what was the Transvaal and the Orange Free State further north into what was Rhodesia, they had stopped it there because it was effectively Rhodesia. They wanted to stop it from going in the other direction in what became Botswana and Bechuanaland. So what happened was that they declared it a protectorate. And so Bechuanaland became a protectorate. And as a consequence, it never became colonized by Boers. Now, there were Afrikaners, Dutch farmers, and the Boers, who settled in Botswana and had been there for 100, 150 years, but they lived for the most part peacefully with their neighbors who spoke Setswana. And you see a few of those families still around today. In fact, the former agricultural minister was from one of those families. He's an Afrikaans-speaking, of course, he speaks Setswana, Afrikaans, and English, but he's a former agricultural minister under President Kama. So what happens is that this territory, which was thinly populated, and there's virtually no resources. It was desert. The Kalahari was there. There's virtually nothing of any value that the Brits could see. The diamonds and gold were further south in South Africa. That's what they were interested in. So they didn't want to deal with Bechuana land. They just wanted to stop it from being colonized by the Dutch. So what happened is that they made it a protectorate, and it was so unimportant to them that the capital to administer the Bechuana land was not even in Bechuana land. It was in Mafeking, which is just south of the border of Botswana in South Africa. So they didn't really care about it. It was actually in South Africa. They administered from there. So what happened is that the traditional leadership system, the traditional system of governance that existed, in which the Kosi, or plural, the Dikosi, in these cases, more than one chief, the Dikosi were responsible for hearing cases when people brought judgments or had issues. They would hear the case, they discuss, they make decisions. This system continued, and it was largely unaffected by Western, Roman, or Dutch law. That didn't affect it for the most part. Eventually, in 1966, Botswana, during the period of liberation, was granted independence. I don't know if that's the right term. They were really sort of semi-autonomous, largely. Their defense and their foreign policy was handled by the British government until then. But in 66, it became an independent country. And the Brits, their timing wasn't good. Just 4 months after Botswana's independence, the first diamond pipe was discovered, and Botswana found diamonds. And so the history of Botswana had, since 1966, has been heavily affected by the discovery of diamonds and the production of diamonds, which have produced revenue. So its development is contrasted because I would argue that the traditional system of governance was able to stay in place for far longer than many other parts of Africa. There was no concerted effort. There were efforts, but not concerted efforts to destroy the system of governance or destroy or diminish the role of the people who are traditionally the leaders in those groups. And so they still carried power. When Botswana became a republic in 1966, the government made a combination for the traditional leadership system of the Dikosi, the chiefs. Well, for instance, President Ian Khama is a traditional chief of his group located in the near Sorowe. And so he was not only the president, but also a chief of his traditional tribe. And that system has continued. Now, they don't have the legal authority that the government has, but these chiefs do still have an important role in society. And that traditional role stayed in place. So when the country got independence, there was very good leadership at the time. President Khama's father was the first president of Botswana, and the Botswana Democratic Party, which took over and has been in uninterrupted power since then, made good decisions. And they focused on trying to develop the country. When the country first came into existence, there were about 585,000 people there. I'll get to your question in a second there, Michael. There were about 585,000 people in the entire country of Botswana, and there were only 16 kilometers of tarred surface road, paved road. 16 kilometers. Think about that. A country the size of Texas, and there are only 16 kilometers of paved roads. There was no reservoir in Gaborone to provide water, which there's a reservoir which unfortunately at times during droughts dries up, and there's a real water problem because Gaborone now has somewhere between 3 and 450,000, whatever the true number is, residents, a lot more than ever expected. But Gaborone had just 5,000 residents in 1966, and Independence today has over 400,000 people. Crazy. Beautiful town though. Wonderful place. All right, so let me. So that I think answered your question, Croy, about why it's developed differently. There's more to it. Corruption has been much lower because people have been held to account, but that is slipping. Corruption has crept in Botswana, and there's always been a degree of corruption. It's always scored well on the Transparency International's corruption index, and always number one or in the top 3 for Africa. But I will tell you that, like any place, there's always some degree of corruption. And it's just a question of what kind of corruption is. What's nice about Botswana is it's not the petty corruption that people in many parts of West Africa and Central Africa have to deal with. The police are not shaking you down at roadside rest stops to take money from you from supposed fines and violations. When you call the police, they respond. They're honest. You don't see that kind of corruption. You don't have to go to the office to register for your vehicle and have to pay a bribe under the table. So you don't see that petty corruption for the most part. Those things are rare. The corruption I'm talking about comes to allocation of land, the allocation of licenses, speaking of which an Irish company, Diamonds Botswana, just got a contract for six more contracts for diamonds, to explore for diamonds in Botswana. Okay, Michael Johnson's question, do I have any info for us on Botswana's relationship with China? Why they get the most government tenders? Well, that is an interesting question, Michael. Yeah, it's strange. it doesn't matter who the president of the United States is. We have had very good diplomatic relations and friendly relations with Botswana since the outset. And Botswana over time has been the most consistent, in my personal view, consistent ally of the United States when it comes to foreign policy. Not just under President Kama, but under all presidents for Botswana. But I would say that under President Kama, when Mugabe and the ZANU-PF party started raiding private property, murdering farm workers and farmers, and stealing farmland, and then claiming that it's because, well, it's fair, they stole as colonizers, missing the point that 42% of that land had been bought since 1980 under Mugabe's government with his approval, and then stealing it from people who bought it legally and justifying it on the basis of people's skin color. Anyway, I'm digressing into Zimbabwe, which is easy to do. But during that time frame when Kama was president, he was the lone figure in SADC and one of the few people in the world who stood up and challenged Mugabe for his government's abuses of their own citizens, whether they're black or white. But we've always had a strong relationship with Botswana. So I find it particularly interesting and a strange dynamic that China has such a strong relationship with Botswana, and it seems that it does. Now, I've often thought that it's a question of convenience. The government of Botswana is pragmatic. If someone wants to provide assistance or donate resources or help them, they're not particular about that, and that's fair enough. Just a moment. For instance, back in the 1980s, Botswana wanted a railroad built, and the Chinese came in and built it. The problem is it was poorly built. It didn't last very long. Chinese workers were the only ones working on it for the most part, and they interacted out there in the Kalahari with the San people and left a number of girls behind who were pregnant and went back to China. That created some problems and some tension. But moving forward, Botswana does seem to get a lot of tenders. As I mentioned, the Tabelapele Voluntary Counseling Testing Center up there in Francistown was built by a Chinese subcontractor. It was very frustrating for me because I would go up to the work site to inspect the progress of the work and see if our money was being well spent and make sure that the project was on time and it was on delivery. And I would get up there, and the only people on the site were Chinese. Well, I spoke a little bit of Setswana, not a lot. I speak Afrikaans well enough that if they could speak that, I could have gotten to speak English, of course, and French. And the guy on site couldn't speak English. He couldn't speak Setswana. All he spoke was some either Mandarin or Cantonese, I don't know, some Chinese. And they just kind of ignored me. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm the one spending $500,000 in for your job, Rocco. So that's when I started noticing the influence of the Chinese was with that project. If you look at the Kama airport there in Gaborone, the international airport, the new terminal, which is now several years old, but it's a new terminal that was built by Chinese. They've built a lot of projects. Chinese, Sino Hydro, and a bunch of others they built the power plant. And for those who live in Botswana, you'll know that the power plant sucks. The three generators, only one of them works habitually, and it's only producing at most usually about 40% of the power that's needed and what's expected from it. And that's very disappointing. But I really can't explain it other than that they're pragmatic. I don't know that there's corruption taking place here. There might be, but I'm unaware of it. I don't have any inside information on it. I do find it disturbing that so many government contracts do go to Chinese companies in Botswana. I think some should be going to Botswana companies, or perhaps even South African countries or Namibian countries, neighboring countries in the region. But it does seem like an unhealthy relationship because the Chinese have their fingers in everything in Botswana. I'm not anything against China. I'm not railing on China. That's not my point. My point here is, but the Chinese aren't very transparent when it comes to business dealings, and that is the problem. Most places you see them operating in Africa, unless they're building a business locally, which is an activity the Chinese are doing now, you'll find that there's a lot of opaque activity going on, sometimes bribes, sometimes profits not being reported honestly, cash being repatriated back to China or wherever. And so it's just a little concerning. But anyway, so I hope that I've answered your question as best I can there, Michael. I don't really know the full answer. I have my suspicions, and I do know some people in the government still, and I could ask some of them, but whether they'd be willing to go on the record or not, that's another question. So there you go, folks. That's a little bit about that. Let's see, what else can we talk about? So Botswana, famous for diamond exports. Botswana is the world's #1 gemstone quality diamond exporter, and most of those diamonds come from the Jwaneng mine. Let's see if I can point it out on the map here without getting too far away from you. Jwaneng is down here in the southeast part of the country, around this area here, right about here. There we go, southeast. So Jwaneng is down there, and that's where most of the world's top quality gemstone diamonds come from and have for a number of years. There are also diamond pipes located further in the northeast, and now they're exploring for yet more diamonds. So diamonds and mining in general play a major role in Botswana. They contribute 80%, 75 to 80% of government revenue, and up to 2/3 of hard currency and exports for Botswana. Now, the government has had multiple 5-year plans for development in which they've talked about diversification ever since 1966. They keep talking about diversification. Yet to this day, the country remains overwhelmingly dependent on commodities, and that is a problem. So Botswana is about to go through a very painful economic period, which has already started, but this is not unprecedented. If you are in Botswana, you will remember 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. But what happened in 2008, 2009 is that when the financial crisis hit and people stopped buying diamonds, De Beers at that time, in its consortium with the Botswana government for something called Debswana, which is owned by both De Beers and the government of Botswana, De Beers bought the diamonds that were still being mined, so they didn't have to lay off diamond workers. Some got laid off, but most didn't. They continued to mine diamonds, and they stockpiled them. De Beers had the cash resource to do that, and that's kind of how they've controlled the diamond market back decades ago when they could control it. They would release diamonds when there was low or high demand and hold them when there's low demand. So what happened in that crisis is that they kept people employed in mining, which kept the economy going. The government also took pragmatic steps, something that most of the world didn't notice, but Botswana retrenched or made redundant 5,000 government workers. That's a lot of workers. So they were laid off for a period of time until they could be brought back on. And then the third thing that the government of Botswana did in that crisis is that they stopped capital projects. So they were supposed to build, like for instance, the staff college for the Botswana Defense Force was supposed to be built at Glen Valley, and they postponed the project rather than spend millions of dollars building something because there were more important issues at hand. So they didn't build capital projects. How are we doing on time? We're actually running a little bit over there. I'll go a little bit longer here since folks are still here. But so they put off that. Now that was the 2008, 2009 crisis. A little over a year later, demand picked up. And of course, demand picked up because India, China, United States and Europe, that's where people are buying diamonds for the most part, especially China and the US. And demand picked up by late 2009, 2010, and Botswana's economy came back. In this situation, I'm not sure what's going to happen. We'll see. It could be quite a crisis for Botswana, and hopefully they have the foreign currency reserves. Back then, they had about several $1 billion sitting aside in foreign currency. I don't know what their current holdings are, but hopefully that will tide them over. Well, if there's no questions left here, I've gone for about 47 minutes. I hope that you found this informative and useful, and I'll thank you for tuning in. If you're not subscribed to the channel, I ask that you do subscribe to the channel. And let me know if you've got comments, if you like this, if you didn't like it, if you'd like to hear something, I take requests. For instance, I did a video on the Namibia becoming the first African country ever to export beef to the United States just a few weeks ago. It took 17 years to negotiate that. That was a consequence of someone in Europe who asked me to do a video on agriculture in Africa. And so I did that one on Namibia. So if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, I'll do it as best I can. I'm a historian, a political scientist, a lot of experience in economics and business, so I'm happy to do that. And so I thank you for your time and tuning in. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you guys again. If you like the videos, please, I ask that you push the like button. You know, you do these videos, you put a lot of time into it, and you don't see the likes, you wonder, well, is it even worth the time and effort? So I ask you to please, if you like it, push the like. If you don't like it, push a dislike. I don't want those, but if it happens, it happens. And I take suggestions, as I said, and I welcome any comments. So with that, I'd like to say to all the Botswana in Botswana, I'd like to say to you, Boroko and Hosiame. Farewell, folks.